black powder blanks, smokeless powder, burn rates, and fast versus slow powder based on surface area versus on complex surface area, and why I really am kind of nervous about the fact that I was sent something that was legally easier to receive that is obviously more dangerous. So here we go. Part of a series on me being an idiot. Some things that are used to train dogs to get used to noise during hunting, blanks, used in shotguns or pistols or rifles. Also to train dogs to ignore those noises when fired upon so that they will not, under any conditions, believe they can be hit by a bullet. Police have to do that. And what's effed up is a dog running at a person with a gun. Statistically, if you didn't know about it, one of the reasons that nobody really complains about cops using dogs for that, it's ridiculously hard for a bad guy to shoot a dog. And they really desperately want to because the dog is going to be angry. But anyway, let's talk about hunting dogs. They have to be able to tolerate the sounds of things and not let it distract them. They can't be skittish. And if it's in their nature to be skittish, they're not useful for a hunting dog or for a defense dog. That's an actual term. I guess there's an assault dog. You know it's going to be in a wiener dog joke soon. Anyway, now lightweight reel cartridges that are used for shotguns, rifles, and pistols. Light loads are the minimum load to get the following characteristics for that firearm, usually. What's the minimum amount of propellant I can use to get a bullet or buckshot or a slug out of a gun in such a way that it will be effective at said range or at said speed? This is based on barrel length. It gets to be very important with some of the guns. And also what you're shooting at. If you're using a self-defense round out of a snub-nosed revolver with a 2-inch barrel, speed may be the only damn thing that makes it hit where you want to, besides rifling. And the pressure level beyond the barrel, if it's still burning propellant, is wasted material except for fear factor. If you can make a loud bang, you could even fire a blank. But here's the problem. Black powder, if it's contained properly, just packed down tight and that's it, with no gaps, is safer and better and louder and works better and is more forgiving than having even one little dead space. On the other end of it is smokeless powders rely on the fact that if you put them in an empty space, they can build up mechanical atmospheric style pressure inside of them that makes it all self-detonate in a pattern that's reliable because it will then still burn, because it is actually burning, not exploding. And the surface of it determines its burn rate. It'll have lots of pinholes in it, or it'll be hollow. It might be looking like really, really fine-grained macaroni on a microscope. And because of that, it's very sensitive to the amount you use. Gunpowder you can get away with being off by a pretty good fraction. And gunpowder, if you light it outside of a barrel, goes foomph. But it always goes foomph, the same freaking rate. Smokeless powder burns really slowly sometimes. Depends on what you're using. But it's based on its surface area, and it doesn't care about a dead space. If you have black powder you're using, it could have a problem with that producing this foomph effect and then suddenly spiking pressure because the expanding gas expands 1,000 to 1 or so, but the gas of the air acts like a brake and then it begins to not expand but compact and then expand from heat. So you get shock waves and all sorts of unpredictableness. So when you get a hold of a blank, it's almost always black powder, unless it's very tightly contained by something. Sometimes it's a wad, but in most cases, for safety reasons, especially theatrical blanks or cartridges you can legally ship, they have to be not truly ammunition. Even though you're sitting there with enough black powder to drive, well, I'll read the numbers, but these are really overpowered for what they are. 1 ounce equals 16 drams, D-R-A-M-S, grams, or 437 grams, or grains, excuse me. I'm not bringing up grams. A dram is 27 grains, or 1.77 grams. So 16 drams would be like 20 grams. That's why we don't bring them up in the same sentence. It gets very hard to understand. A gram is about 15 grains and about half a dram, D-R-A-M. Why are we using this? Because at one time, gunpowder was listed in all sorts of ways, but specializing it by saying drams made nice round numbers. Dram equivalent became a new standard used in shotgun shells and lots of other things when you went over to smokeless powder. So the equivalency would be based on the same shell, the same preventive, plug or slug or whatever for everything. And if you look up dram equivalent and then find out what the actual dram or gram capacity is, you can figure out that approximately half as much actual powder propellant is needed if you use smokeless powder. It's a little bit more economical because, and this is the reason, the majority of the material in black powder, it'll burn at the temperature and get hot and turn into a vapor or whatever, but about half of its actual mass or material, volume or weight, depending on what you look up, is not going to turn into a gas. Smokeless powder turns almost exclusively into a gas with very little particulate material. So the amount of expansion you can get, that is a squirrel, the amount of expansion you can get from smokeless powder is almost 2 to 1. Not really, because again, it depends on if it's contained. Smokeless powder, if you contain it, will suddenly go off. All right? So they're not equivalents, and you can't really translate back and forth, but the proof's in the pudding. When they would fire a shell, a bullet, or anything, they would fill it up with smokeless powder until they got up to the same speed. To hell with whether it was overpressure or dangerous. They would test them in bull barrels. After they got it to the same speed and figured out the gram or dram or ounce or grain equivalent, then they would actually test out a normal barrel and see if it'd blow the hell up. Some cartridges had to be toned way down for smokeless powder because of some peculiarity, or they had to redesign them, seating the bullet in deeper or less. Using less propellant makes it less dangerous, but they'd have to figure out some way to amplify it. All sorts of things, including using much more intense primers, or less intense primers, or using propellant. Now we get to the speeds, propellants that will detonate slower. For a rifle, it detonating slower, it'll still be the same amount of gas, but it'll push it along at a slower rate throughout the barrel, and it's still burning technically in the barrel. If it's a pistol, you need it to go off like that, short distance. You need a fast burning, but a tiny amount of powder, and then something in between for whatever. And figuring that out without killing your customers became a major, big deal for ammunition makers. So this is the funny thing. Black powder puts off stuff that likes absorbing water, and it's also acidic, corrosive, whatever. It's much easier to get away with making things very standardized with it. So when I get a shotgun shell loaded with nothing but gunpowder and having just a card over the top, in fact, it says, don't put a projectile on it. Even if you're going to put it in a shotgun that can actually take it, you might overload it. Now I'm going to give you the numbers. Now this is, again, blanks are going to be a different propellant most of the time, not always, than the actual normal gun. But they can be black powder, cordite, a nitrocellulose-based material, or they can be some modern smokeless powders that are much better. It could also be, it could be Pyrex. I mean, it doesn't matter what's in it as long as it's safe, effective, and has been tested. But not knowing these differences and not accounting for them and not testing the living hell out of it means that you're putting yourself at risk if you do reloading without having an explicit instruction, this amount of gunpowder, this amount of smokeless, this amount of Pyrex. What's funny is black powder muzzleloader people who are willing to do experiments with smokeless powder, true smokeless powder, know more about this than anybody else, and they don't post very much because even they say, I can make it work for a specific gun with a specific weight. You change anything by even a couple of percentage points, it may not work properly or it may be dangerous. So yeah, buying packaged cartridge ammunition, probably a good idea. So anyway, when I got these blanks, they had a cubic inch of gunpowder in them. Or very close to it. And I'm like, and then I smelled it. Doesn't smell like gunpowder. You have to burn it first. It has a slight coating on the outside, to make it to where it can last longer. I found that out, that they make the powder and then they mix it with a bath of sorts that is done under it coats the thing so that it burns properly and it's a little safer. It also makes it where you can't smell the gunpowder. A dog can. Bomb sniffing dogs will detect us. So here we go. 12 gauge, 10 and 8 gauge. Here we go. On a 12 gauge, the number of drams, D-R-A-M-S, dram it. The drams are 2.5 drams to push 1 ounce of shot or slug. And that's considered a light load. 3 drams to do 1 1/8 ounce. And 1 1/4 ounce is pushed by 3.5 drams. Now again, at that point, we'll just use 3 drams. How heavy is 3 drams? Let's do it in ounces. A dram is the equivalent to 1.7 grams, or 26 grains. I'm not even bringing up the ounces. How much is in the blank instead of 3 drams? 6. But it's gunpowder. So it's mechanically the equivalent to the normal or even heavy explosive shot. Traditionally, when you look up blanks, to overcompensate for the fact that they have nothing in front of them, because again, they're usually gunpowder to make them actually safer, they usually overdo it. So yeah, that's probably overdoing it. What about 10 gauge? Well, they start at 4 drams for the same 1 ounce load, and 1.5 ounces is driven by 4.5 ounces, and the blank's 8 drams. It's double the amount. So you double the load for gunpowder from a light load or a normal load. So now we get on to the next thing. Any of you thinking of using these things as a propulsor round for literally driving, well, they're not really railroad spikes, but they're railroad pins. I've seen something like that. I saw one when I was a kid and I didn't realize what they were loading, and then I'm like looking at the thing and thinking, oh, I'm having a flashback. These are supposed to be flashbangs, but they're just gunpowder, I hope. But anyway, when these things go off, they have a lot of mechanical pressure behind them. And again, it will expand, let's say, half a cubic inch to 1,000 times the volume, because it's 1 cubic inch approximately, and it's lossy, so half the volume is going to not actually expand. Now, for those of you who don't know, if you want to multiply something by 1,000, it's 10 times this way, 10 times this way, and 10 times this way. 10 by 10 by 10 is 1,000, which means if it takes up a cubic inch, it'll take up a 10-inch cube of space. It'll expand a lot, suddenly, violently, propulsively. And of course, at this point, it would be a little smaller, just the size of your head. So yeah, a 12 gauge blank would very easily be dangerous all by itself. These are overdriven as hell. And obviously from that volume level, you realize a barrel 26 inches long is going to contain maybe 30 cubic inches of space needed to fill up. So you obviously don't need a cubic inch of material expanding 1,000 to 1. Or do you? Again, this is supposed to throw a flame out the barrel of a standard size 18-inch barrel gun, and it's supposed to be very, very loud, and it's supposed to continue expanding and exploding as it's coming out to create a big, loud, scary boom. For theatrical purposes on stage, maybe, and on movies, definitely. Along with the fact that you can fill it with, other materials that will burn in the air, like, I don't know, Brillo pads or something, I don't know. Dragon's breath. Now, the other thing is, as a propulsor round from a shotgun, yes, you could use this to throw a slug way too easily, but you'd better make sure it's a bull barrel or a hunk of pipe you got from the store, because this is the kind of stuff that would be this close to being a proof round, or not. I have to look up the equivalents on proof rounds. I'll include that below if I can. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. And this has been a safety warning concerning blank and or black powder charges used without anything in them, and whether or not you were thinking of using them to do anything other than go bang and have no projectiles. I recommend not doing that unless you see somebody testing the shit out of this. Someday I'll be able to do that from a long distance, not from around a tree with a string. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that.